And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And I hope everybody is having a great March or April, whenever this is released. Probably
I
March.
don't know what month it's gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the end of the world could happen next week, and we wouldn't know about it. So, um, but today we're going to take a look at American fiction. And can I just say this movie flew under my radar, kind of like The Holdovers. But then when I watched it, I was like, damn, this is a really, really good movie. Um, so we're gonna go ahead and dive into it. But before we
I
do,
think
remember,
whoever suggested that to us
yeah, I don't know.
it was me.
But
It was me. It was me. I did it.
uh, of course you're moving this. Yes, you did. That was you. That's why you're the movie pope. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know how we're doing in the comments below. Because I check these videos and the comment sections are very bare bones. So please feel free to say what you want to say. If you want to say that yes, the movie pope is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or yes, the movie pope needs to be the one sitting in the Vatican instead because he makes more sound decisions, by all means, let us know. And
Ooh,
as
hope
always,
it's not that latter one.
don't worry. You can teach yourself Italian using Duolingo, which is not a sponsor of this video, but we would welcome that either way. That and or Babbel. I mean, we would welcome sponsorship from Babbel too. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. And can I just say, this movie doesn't waffle around; it just dives straight into the action. From the very beginning, and it was actually a pretty short movie compared to all the other movies that we've seen before. Um, so you could watch this under 2 hours, and get everything you need from
Yeah.
it.
Yep. Feels like movies have gotten progressively longer, and yeah, this one was a nice viewing. So yeah, absolutely. So I thoroughly like this, and really, I think the biggest point in this is just Jeffrey Wright absolutely rocks in this role.
Yeah,
Absolutely liked him. I think he just does such a good job of he pulls off this very strong, like eloquent writer type. But then I think he brings enough like kind of like physicality to the role to kind of play his quote unquote alter ego. So I think he's able to do that as Stag R. Lee, which I guess we'll get in later. But I just really think Jeffrey Wright absolutely rocked it out in this role. And like you pointed out, like this is clearly a movie that doesn't pull any punches. I think there's obviously there's gonna be a lot of racial discussion with this. So I guess just the forewarning, it's a part of the movie. It's gonna come up, and like you said, it definitely doesn't pull any punches. I think it's just kind of one of those things where we see the world from Monk, played by Jeffrey Wright. And really, he just kind of, he's this, I guess, a brilliant writer. Like, I mean, just from what we're told, right? He's a very strong writer, and his work is constantly being overlooked. And pretty much his response is that his stories are not, and I'm going to take it directly from the movie, they're not black enough. And I think the way this movie handles that is really impressive, and I think we really get to dive in a lot into Monk's character. We start to understand what he is, and I think this kind of movie has two strong story beats to it, right? We kind of have the story of Monk and his life as an author, and then we also have this story of Monk as the person and how he interacts with his family. So I think there's two like strong stories that we kind of have that share kind of back and forth screen time throughout. It definitely, I would say, kind of starts off with this very obvious idea, and Monk has this kind of interaction in a classroom where the N word is written on the board, right? And he's talking about the fact that we're going to be reading books about the old South. That word gets thrown around quite a bit, and we have a person in class that's like finds the word offensive. Person is white. So there's kind of this back and forth with Monk, and it pretty much culminates to the fact that, you know what, if I can get over this word, you can get over this word. And it pretty much ends with the person crying and leaving the class. So like you said, it starts off hot and heavy, and it absolutely doesn't pull any punches as far as kind of creating this narrative. So did you want to chime in anything else with that? I know it kind of starts off very punchy.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, what I really enjoyed about that opening scene was the fact that the one student who seems to take offense at the use of the N word is a white student, right? And we talked about this before recording, but I mean, it's just so ironic that that Monk and the black characters don't really seem to take issue with it because they understand, that was the thing of the past, a product of a bygone era, and that's something that most people are smart enough not to use these days. So they're not weighed down by the sins of the past. But for whatever reason, this white student just seems to think, wow, like that is the most horrible thing ever. And I kind of and you see it all the time too in the real world where where a lot of these young people kind of get it into their heads, hey, this is an issue that we need to keep fighting because if we don't do it, then obviously this is going to continue. But you kind of have to wonder sometimes if they even know what year it is, right? Because because in that girl's case, it kind of makes you wonder, does she still think they're living in the 1960s? Like, does she still think that this is something people like use casually out on the streets? I mean, the obvious answer is no. People don't use this deplorable word, and in people who use it, they're deplorable for for saying such a thing. But she seems to think that this is something that is ongoing, and I find it funny that Monk tells her, hey, if I can get over this, then you can too. And when she when she goes out of the classroom crying, I'm like, you know what? Good on him. I mean, there's no point in being stuck in the past. There's no point in trying to dwell in what's happened because what's done is done. And we did mention it when we did a review of Across the Spider-Verse, that people aren't necessarily beholden to the past to become who they are in the future, right? Um, what I also what I also think is a bit is kind of ironic too because that classroom scene kind of sets the stage for what happens in the movie later on, where Monk finds himself struggling to break free of the past, but everybody around him, and the majority of them are white, by the way. They kind of get into their heads that that blacks are an oppressed minority, and we need to give them a voice. But the irony is we'll only give them a voice if they speak and act in a certain way. So they're not allowed to speak or behave. I guess will be the right word. Like natural or what they're used to, the way that they're used to speaking. I guess another way to put it is Monk can't be Monk. He has to be Stagger Lee, right? Because
Yes.
if he's not Stagger Lee, then nobody's gonna pay attention to him. Because and you even see in the conversation between him and his agent, especially when the agent does that example with the Johnny Walker bottles, he's like, nobody.
Great advertising by Johnny Walker, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I don't drink Johnny Walker, but that was a smart move. But it was such a great example because because if you think about it, even in 2024, people still have this expectation of what it means to be a certain way, right? So the agent basically says, people don't want smart and sophisticated. They want something that's simple and easy. And what's simple and easy? It's they want someone who's from the hood and who talks a certain way, who speaks in the Ebonics, and is a gangbanger or is a hustler. Basically, they don't want someone who is erudite, who went to a good university and works a good job, because you look at Monk's family, most of them are are working
Yeah.
pretty successful jobs. Even Cliff, even though Cliff is like this, guy who's off the rails, who's like, doing blow and basically banging every dude he can get his hands on. He's still a pretty successful guy, as a plastic surgeon, right? And
Mhm.
his sister Lisa, for the very few minutes we see her on screen, she's doing pretty good as a as a doctor, and even Monk is doing pretty well as a university professor. So it's not so it's not like they're being oppressed or anything. They're doing pretty good, for as professionals. But but what's really discouraging for for Monk is the fact that he has to dumb himself down um
Yeah.
in order to be accepted. Um
And I
and
mean, you see that happen really quickly on in the story, right? Because
yeah,
he kind of goes on that sabbatical. He tries to be a sabbatical, but it's kind of like a leave of absence.
yeah, pretty
He
much.
goes to this panel in Boston, and kind of the new hot book that's out, right? His panel does have a lot of people in it. The new panel is everyone that's going to see the Tara Golden author, and she wrote the book "Weaves Lives into Ghetto." Right? Is
Yeah,
literally the name
exactly.
of the title.
Yeah.
So, kind of to your point, right? Like, this is something where, for Monk, like, he sees this and he's like, this is what's popular, right? And it kind of furthers his mindset that, I'm being told, like, hey, my story's not black enough, it's not hitting the audience we want to listen to. And then when he goes out there, he sees, this book, and like I said, it comes across exactly to the tropes that he loathes, right? He talks about, it deals with family drama, drugs, and cops, right? Those are all the telltale signs of it, and he has a huge problem with it. So yeah, absolutely. Like, we
I
see
mean,
that,
just
and it
a
happens very
passage.
early on. It drives the point home.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like the passage that she reads is just so ridiculous and so hilarious. It's like
Yeah,
because when you go, because if you've ever gone to these book readings, when people open a book and read, they're gonna speak, properly, and that's not to
yeah,
sound racist, or that's not to sound racist or anything, but to borrow a phrase, they're speaking the King's English, in other words. So like when she reads the passage, like, "Yo, Shonda, where you going?" It's like, okay,
yeah.
this is a bit of a shock to the system.
Yes, it is very. There's great justification there because obviously, Centaurus, when she's talking about it, has a very different way of speaking, and then when she, kind of jumps into the book and jumps into the character, she has her own spin on how the character will sound. So, yeah, so absolutely, and so yeah, and I think that's where kind of things really start off, right? So, he sees the success of that book, and that's what kind of all this stuff is building up in his head. So I'm constantly turned away, my books are not selling, even though I know I have the skills as a writer. I see books that I feel like are very pandering, and all these things are kind of building up to him. So he's like, well, you know what, let's just go ahead, and I'm going to create my own story, and I'm just going to be very stereotypical about it. So this is where he creates the character of Star Lee, who is an ex-convict running from the law. So he kind of creates
Right.
this alternative persona, and it's kind of funny, like when they're playing it out. And I wish they did this more in the movie, right? They're playing out this kind of scene, right? And as
Uh-huh.
Keith David, right, that's playing the father, and as you know, um, as Monk is writing it, he's kind of writing, um, uh, all the words for the characters as they're kind of reading it off.
Yeah, it's kind of like a
And I wish this
play,
was something.
really.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I wish they did it more in the movie. They kind of did it this scene. They do it at the very end. I wish they built up more on it because I thought it was really cool to see, him typing and then these characters reading what he's pretty much saying. So I thought that was super cool. So you see him and he's going there, and he's just like, okay, well, what are the stereotypes? Well, okay, we're gonna have family drama, so we're gonna have these two characters. They're going to be, father and son, because of course they are. They're not connected. They don't know they're connected. Well, at least the son doesn't know he's connected, but the father pretty much tells it, and it's like, okay, well, what are we going to talk about? Well, there's drugs or something going on. That's going to be what the talking point is, and oh, he's going to shoot the father, and then you hear cop sirens go off. Like, he pretty much just tries to hit all the beats that he perceived as what people are interested in. Like, if I'm going to be a Black author writing this is what I perceive people want to be interested in, and that's what he does. And I like how he, brings it to his agent, and the agent pretty much has kind of this reaction of, "Wow, this isn't you." And I think Monk even admits, like, "Yeah, this isn't me. This isn't what I'm interested in. This is not what I'm about." But they end up sending off the book to people, and guess what? The book is immensely popular. Everyone wants it. So here he is. He's creating, in his mind, he's creating trash, but people are just lapping it up. That's what they're interested in. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, geez, he's got to, he has to almost change his persona now, because whenever he's doing these meetings, he does the meetings not as Monk, but he does the meetings as Stag R. Lee. So we kind of see a bunch of these interactions where, instead of him, being a very eloquent and fluent speaker, he kind of goes with a more stereotypical approach to the way that he talks to people. And he does it because he's thinking okay, well, this is what people want to hear, right? They want to hear me talking in this different type of fashion. And that's what he does. And it's just kind of funny to see how people just kind of latch on to whatever he's saying, and they go with it. There's a great scene where he meets with that movie director, right? That's pretty much doing like blaxploitation films.
Yeah, Wiley.
Yeah. Thank you. And he meets them, and he wants to meet him because he really wants to, meet who he is. So, for Monk, he kind of has this persona of, doing what he's supposed to be doing. And it's kind of funny where, the way he's kind of interacting, he hears the hears sirens going off. Here he thought it was for, his, mother, who's, having is having Alzheimer's. So he's thinking he's hearing sirens, and he's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go there because, I want to make sure mom's okay." The director thinks that, oh, he heard sirens because he thought the police were coming for him. And that's what the director was interested in. That's what sold them on it. Here Monk thought that leaving the meeting would be terrible, but the director was like, "Oh, cool. It's, this guy that's
he's a real deal.
That's running around. That's what he wants to do." He's like, "Oh, cool. Well, that's what's happening." Even when he meets with but he's doing the conference call with the book producers, right? And he wants to rename the book. So he wants to change the name from what was it? My Pathology. Yeah. So change from My Pathology, and it's just like, I just gonna rename it Fuck, right? That was it. And it's just like something where Monk wants it to backfire so much that, this is what he wants to have happen. And guess what? They're like, "Oh, that's so great. It's so brave. That's so amazing. That's exactly what we're looking for." And I just love his reaction. Like, he's just like, everything he's trying to do, he wants to sabotage this so much. Yet everything he does it totally out of character, totally out of element. But because the people are like expecting this of his person, they fall in line with it, and it's just so funny to see how all that interaction is. So yeah, what'd you kind of think about Monk and Stag R. Lee as far as their characters and kind of their I guess how he kind of takes on the persona of Stag R. Lee?
Well, I'm gonna refer you to a Spike Lee movie from 2000 called Bamboozled, because because it pretty much follows the same path. Now this is a movie that a coworker of mine turned me on to probably like 3 years ago, and what's interesting is that there are many parallels between this and American Fiction, because Damon Wayans, he plays this Harvard educated TV executive called Pierre Delacroix, right? And that's not his real name, but he uses it to make him sound more erudite, right? And he works for this network where basically, he's pitching these ideas to his boss, and the boss is like, no, those are shit ideas, dude. I mean, none of them are really good. I mean, they don't have any heft, they don't have any punch. So, and to borrow a phrase from from American Fiction, they're not black enough. Basically, the idea is that Delacroix's pitching. So Delacroix decides, you know what, I'm just gonna like pitch the most ridiculous, racist, idea ever, and we'll just see how that goes. So he pitches the idea for a revival of a minstrel show, kind of like what you saw with Amos and Andy back in the 20s and 30s, right? Where actors wore blackface and they sang stereotypical songs. And would you believe it? The producer loves the idea, and they end up turning it into a TV show. And much to Delacroix's chagrin, this becomes a huge runaway success. And to make it even make it even more more ridiculous is the fact that they hired two black actors, but the black actors are forced to wear blackface, and behave in very stereotypical ways, just singing songs and behaving in ways that that the old South used to view blacks back in the day. So why do I bring that up? Because basically what Monk is going through is pretty much the same process that Delacroix goes through. And mind you, Bamboozled was a movie that came out 24 years ago. So at that time, the whole minstrel show idea, it wasn't prevalent, but people were still aware of its existence because this was made at the cusp of near the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, right? But what I'm getting at here is that is that the ideas of of what it means to be black, of how black culture is perceived, is seen through a filtered lens, right? So in Bamboozled's case, people were enjoying this really radical take on what it means to be black through a minstrel show. So blackface, singing ridiculous songs and behaving, in a very exaggerated manner. That was the way that whites saw blacks back then. When you translate that to American Fiction 24 years later, right? It's I mean, really, the concept hasn't changed. Yes, obviously, people aren't wearing blackface and they aren't singing songs about Mammy, and they're not, they're not behaving, in a ridiculous way. But the idea is still the same because, because especially when you look, when you look at how everybody's reacting towards Monk's, Monk's book, everyone's like, this is like the best thing ever. But keep in mind, most of these characters are white, and most of them have the sort of presupposition of what it means to be black. And what is their presupposition of black? It's basically living in the ghetto, having served time in prison, speaking in a way that isn't very eloquent, right? And running away whenever you hear a siren. So that so if Monk were to behave in any other way, nobody would ever give a second thought about him. But because he's creating this persona of of an ex felon who goes through all these things, everybody laps it up because it's the lowest common denominator. It's very simple. It whether people like to admit it or not, it plays into their expectations of what it means to be a certain type of human being,
Yeah.
because that's what they're used to, whether we want to admit it or not.
Mhm.
And just like with Bamboozled, whether people want to admit it or not, most of their understanding of black culture back then was seen through Amos and Andy. So now, so flash forward to 2024, most of our understanding of black culture is taken from The Wire or any other cop show where people have to go into the projects and have to deal with people who are dealing drugs or shooting each other, or having to live without one or two parents who are in jail. that's their understanding of the Black experience, but it's not necessarily the way that Blacks would envision it. It's the way that, it's a vision that's been imposed upon them, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
it's
So,
people trying to write about Black people
right,
having an idea
exactly.
about what it is.
Right. So basically, I mean, if I may be bold to say, it, it's kind of racist in a way, because because these panelists are basically telling Monk, or I should say the producers, all the producers and the agent also, they're telling Monk, hey, this is how you need to be Black, and you need to do this, this, and this, and if you don't do this, this, and this, then you're not Black. I mean, you're just something else, really.
Hmm. Yeah, I think
So
even the
that's what I thought was
producer
just so
was like,
weird.
we're gonna dress you up. You're gonna put on a do rag and have one of those shirts on with the muscle showing. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like
exactly. I mean, it's no. I mean, if you think about it, it's no more different than in a way. It's kind of like in Bamboozled, where you had these Black actors wearing blackface. It's still. It's still dressing, in a stereotypical fashion. I mean, obviously he's
yes,
not painting his
yes.
face black, but he's still, but he's still playing a character that honestly should, should be relegated to the pages of history, but people are still interested in seeing it because, it's very much, like seeing a minstrel from the 20th century, except it's, updated to quote unquote modern sensibilities. So,
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's interesting to me how we kind of see kind of two sides of this, right? We see a lot with the book, but to me, even the family elements are such an interesting thing with it. I think this is what kind of separates this from other movies that I watched from last year, at least just from my experience, was I loved how, like, even if we're not focusing on the Stagger Lee character, we have so many great stories with his family, right? And we see kind of the struggles that he's going through. So, I think a good time to talk about like his family. So we meet, kind of at the beginning of the movie, we meet his sister Lisa, and like you pointed out, like the family's all relatively successful, right? So Lisa's a doctor, so kind of meets her. Clearly Lisa to me kind of felt like the linchpin of the family almost. Like she seemed to be the one that kind of kept everything together. I really liked her interactions. She kind of did some, kind of playful punches at Monk. I think Monk, when they're driving in a car to the mom's house, Monk is like, hey, has any of my books ever, been super critical? I forget what exactly he says, but has anything ever been so important to you? And she's like, yeah, your one book, it was great for, making sure my table didn't wobble. Um, and it just was so humorous to hear her say that because, like I said, she, is able to kind of point out those jokes because, I think for Monk, he knows that his stuff isn't selling the way that he wants it to. So, the sister could sit there and kind of point fun at it. We found out that the father, Monk's father, right, he killed himself at a certain stage. I don't remember. I don't know if they ever really said how long ago it was, but, he had killed himself. And you found out that the father pretty much was cheating on the mom, and Monk was totally oblivious to it. So everyone else other than him seemed to understand what was happening.
right.
We meet Monk's mom. Monk's mom, unfortunately, going through his Alzheimer's, seems to be forgetting a lot of things. Um, so that kind of progresses through the story where he needs to get more money, and I think this is one of the driving factors for him wanting to move forward with the book, even though he really doesn't want to,
Hmm.
because he needs the funds for his mom. So that kind of gets a jump start on it. I think, unfortunately, like one of the things that I really wish we got more of was I really like the sister, and for how little screen time she had, she was really impactful for a short time that she was there, and kind of creating the story because the second time we see her, she's dead. For a lack of a better word, right? She seems like she has a heart attack. I don't think they ever said specifically what it was, but all of a sudden has a heart attack and she dies. And with the funeral, it helps us introduce to the brother, and I think the brother was really strong in this. I think the brother's name is Cliff. I think he was such an interesting character. I think a character that had a lot going on, and for him, I looked at his character. He didn't feel a part of the family. That's how I really felt whenever he was on the screen. He wasn't kind of around a whole lot. He always seemed to want to try to distance himself. And I think for him, he was obviously a closeted gay person. And after the sister died, he seemed to be a lot more open about his sexuality. And unfortunately, this really put him at odds with his mother, because his mother definitely did not seem to approve of that lifestyle. Um, so for him, like, he's someone that's really struggled being in this family, and he just always felt like he couldn't be himself. And I think that really his whole kind of, not really arc, but his story was really fascinating. How he kind of begins to kind of, he accepts who he is, and he's okay with being the person that he wants to be. And they kind of get his kind of like acceptance when the housekeeper is having a wedding. And they want him to be a part of it, and she's like, your family. And I just love that scene so much, because you can see his reaction, like he just didn't feel like he ever belonged somewhere. And just having this housekeeper say, your family, you're a part of this, and kind of just giving him a hug, like, you could feel so much weight being lifted off his shoulders. Like, this was something he's been waiting to hear from all these people that have been the closest to him. And that felt like a moment where it really stuck out. And then I would say the other character that definitely is important to this story is the girlfriend, Coraline. And I think for her, is kind of the um, kind of read books, and I think he really connects with her, because for Monk, like, he appreciates her for kind of liking, I would say, highbrow discussions. Like, he's somebody that I think looks at her as like an educational equal, as far as someone that's really into this type of stuff. And they definitely see kind of this nice blossoming relationship. But it all comes kind of towards an end when he finds the book fuck sitting there on the table, and he kind of lashes out at her because hey, look, this book is garbage. Why do you why are you reading it? Why do you like it? And I think it just kind of goes to show that he's, at least for Monk, he's so ingrained in this idea that people have to act differently from what society's thinking, and because of that, he kind of pushes people away. So yeah, I just love, like, all the little family things. I think were just really, really well done, where a lot of these side characters that I think in most movies would be forgotten, these characters, at least for me, they really stuck out, especially for Cliff, who I think he did a really good job. So
Yeah, because I mean,
did
like,
you have anything? Yeah,
because I was gonna say, because it's just wonderful to see Monk and Cliff's journey kind of juxtaposition with each other, right? So
yes,
Cliff is on this journey to kind of find acceptance with himself, kind of be more open, whereas Monk, he kind of finds himself kind of closing himself off, more and more, right? Because
absolutely.
because he's just so ashamed of of what he's made himself out to be. This
Yes,
Stagger Lee kind of character, whereas Cliff, he's finding more and more acceptance of who he is as as a gay man, right?
yep.
And I love that scene where at the wedding where where Monk goes off to be by himself, and then he and Cliff have that brotherly talk, and you can tell, like, this is like a genuine brotherly moment. They're not like messing
Mhm.
around with each other like they normally do. Cliff kind of gives him that pretty good advice. Let people love all of you, right? Um, it's kind of a shame that that he and Coraline never get back together, but it's that realization that, yeah, I might as well learn to accept myself, all of me, right? Not just not just the person that I present to the world, but but of who I am as a person deep down. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is that, yeah, I mean, Monk is this well-spoken, erudite kind of guy. He speaks the king's English, right? Very, very proper, very prim. And yeah, that's who he is. But you also kind of get the feeling that that's kind of the impression that he wants to give to people, right? Because I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
think about it. Like, who you are, in private is 9 times out of 10 going to be different from who you present yourself to the wider world, right? I mean, obviously you can tell locker room jokes to your friends and just be like, yeah, it's all fun and games, but obviously you're not going to behave that way in in your public life, right? um and I kind of get the feeling that that even though Monk is who he is, at the same time it kind of feels like it's sort of an act he kind of has to put on. So when he becomes Stagger Lee, now he's got to put on two acts, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes it's this it's this double act that he's got to put on, because he's trying to you know trying to be true to himself, but he's also got to put on this persona that makes a lot of money, because obviously he's not doing this just for the hell of it. He's doing it because he needs to put his mother in a facility that can take care of her, because she's
Hmm.
unable to take care of herself. um I really like that scene that he and Centaura had in that room over lunch. You remember that scene? Um
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because yeah, and actually, let's set that up, because I think you're getting right to the conclusion, which I think
because
is
that's the central
really
point of
is.
the movie right there,
Oh
that
yeah,
discussion.
absolutely, yeah. Because really, so for Monk, right, he ends up being a part of this 5-person panel for something that's just called the literary award. Literally, that's what the award is. They just call it the literary award, right? Really generic sounding thing. So Monk is a part of this, 5-person panel to do this. And one of the people that's also in the panel is Centaura Golden, who wrote the We's Lives in the Ghetto. So ends up that his book ends up being a part of the kind of the thing. And it's really interesting how everything kind of devolves from there, because as they're talking about Staggerly's book, the whole time, like, he's thinking that Centaura is going to agree with the book being good, because he thinks that what he wrote is similar to what Centaura wrote. And then when he kind of confronts her about it, it's the exact opposite. She's like, I don't see the parallels. She describes his book as being very hollow. And it's interesting because for him, he looks at it like these are the same things. Like, he doesn't get why it's different. And then when he talks with Centaura about it, Centaura's like, no, like, for me, my book, I went out there, I did the research. Like, this is true. This is a true story. So even though it might kind of get pigeonholed into this kind of stereotypical way, it is very much a true story. Whereas for Monk, like what he did it strictly just the stereotypical, this is what you get type of thing. So I really like the interaction, because I think we see Centaura and Monk, they kind of agree on a lot of things. And Monk is kind of surprised by this. And then, when he kind of finally confronts her about it, he realizes how wrong or how bad his line of thinking is. So yeah, absolutely. And I'll let you go ahead. I know you want to talk about that. I just want to help set that up a little bit there, because we're nearing the end.
I mean, I'll say this. I mean, at the surface level, I mean, yeah, there really isn't that much of a difference. Um, because at the end of the day, they're both of their books are pandering to to the wider audience, and as a result, they sell pretty well, right? Um, but what I'll say is this. I mean, I kind of feel like I kind of feel like even though both authors started from from different positions, right? They ended up at the same place, because they're both writing about a very similar experience. So in Centaura's case, she said she did this through research, right? She talked to people and got to know what their lives were like, and with Monk, it was kind of like, well, what are the worst stereotypes out there? I'll just pull them from TV, because because you remember he was watching he was watching some TV shows and movies that
Yes.
showed very
Yep.
typical behavior.
Yes.
So Monk is like,
Mhm.
I'll just take the stuff that that I've seen on TV and just put it in book form, right? So so one could say Monk's approach is a bit more cynical because he's not coming from a very genuine standpoint, whereas Centara, you could make the argument, she actually did her research, she actually talked to people, and she's trying to present people's lives in an authentic way, right? But but just speaking from an outsider standpoint, when you look at it, they're both writing the same thing, because they're both presenting things, in the same, in the same vernacular language that that African Americans speak, to each other, right? They're both addressing situations that that would be common in their experience, right? It's just and if there are any people out there watching, please let us know in the comments below, kind of set us straight if need be. But I feel like they're really, I kind of have to agree with Monk. There really isn't that much of a difference between those two at the end, because they both arrived at the
Mm,
same because they both arrived at the same conclusion, even though they both
so
started off at different standpoints.
I get where you're getting at, and I think the important thing, or at least what I got away from it, was her experience was authentic. So for her, it was.
I'm not questioning the authenticity.
Oh no,
Yeah,
no, of course, of
yeah,
course. No,
yeah. Centaurus started
I
from from a position of of genuine I guess you could say genuine concern and understanding, right? But at the same time, to to use Monk's point, she did go to, she did grow up in a very good family. She did go to a very prestigious liberal arts college. I think she went to Oberlin or something, right? So so even then there is that degree of separation where where just like Monk, they both grew up in in
yes,
situations that are divorced from what from what, let's say, the majority would not necessarily experience, right?
yeah, yeah. I think the way I look at it, right? So I feel like for Centaur, right, when she's working on something, she's listening to these experiences and she wants it to be authentic. And I think just because they got to the same conclusion doesn't necessarily mean like the journey was very different. And I think that was, to me, what more of the purpose was. It wasn't necessarily that ultimately what they got to was the same thing. It's that one person went one direction where they're like, okay, I really want to create an authentic experience of what they're going through. I'm going to sit there and talk it. And I just happen to get to kind of a similar point as Monk, kind of using a lot of stereotypes. So it's kind of like they went in diverging paths. So even though they maybe got to a similar conclusion, the fact that what she was doing was really wanting to provide a true voice for what was going on. So she kind of made reference to, it's like, I think Monk is just upset that people want him to be different, and that's what his issue is. And for her, it was more like, okay, I know that people are interested in this, so I want to help create a voice for these people that are having true things, right? So whereas Monks feels like, well, he's just pulling at stereotypes, she's like, okay, these are true people truly going through these experiences. So yeah, I do agree with you for
Right.
where it lands. I just think that where it diverged was really the path in which they got it. So
But
yes, you could.
but Lee, but then you can say, well, Centaur kind of set the template, for Monk to follow, and it seems like with Monk, it's like, well, there really isn't any wiggle room. Like, if this, if this is what's selling, if Centaur is presenting this, I kind of have to follow this mold in order to, you know, achieve the same results. It's like, it's like following a formula or a recipe, right? You have to you have to follow these steps in order to get to where you want to go, because Monk did try it, try it his way, right? And he wrote some pretty interesting stuff, but they weren't getting, the same level of press that Centaur's work was getting. And that's not completely, his doing. Obviously, the agent played a huge role, and obviously there were family
Yes, he
circumstances.
definitely did. Hmm.
But one could say, one could say that Centaur kind of yes, Centaur came from from an authentic place, a genuine concern to bring the voices out, but I'll say two things. I mean, yes, she did. She kind of set the tone for, for what people um, for what people wanted, and as a result, Monk kind of had to follow that position. But at the same time, she was also, she was also catering to, like I mentioned earlier, what the majority of people would sort of see as black culture, kind of appeal to what they understand, what's easy for them to digest, as opposed to, you know, to use another example, like a more Cosby um, approach to understanding black culture. So more people would respond well to, let's say, the Wire approach to black culture, gangs and all that stuff, as opposed to a more Cosby approach where a successful middle class family that happens to be black, right?
Yes. No, I totally, like I said, I agree with you on the idea that I don't think we're saying things differently. I think it's just the focal point for me is more on who earned the story. So like I'm more focused on like how we led up to it as opposed to like where it ended. So I totally understand where you're going with, and like I said, it makes sense. I would argue that, like, yes, is so if she set up kind of the formula for what was supposed to happen, then really for Monk, right, he kind of took a shortcut through it, right? Because for him, it was more about creating this kind of like similar type of thing, but he was just going to grab from whatever, which made his things feel hollow, whereas hers comes from a very genuine point of interest, right? Now, how like was hers more financially driven, like I don't think we really got too much of what her intention was for creating this stuff. She definitely could have been like, well, I'm going to pander to the masses, but I'm going to make sure that my stuff is true to what people are experiencing by actually getting some real stories. But yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from on that. I do agree that there's definitely parallels for it. Just one person felt like they really earned how they produce things, so it's kind of weird for Monk to sit there and say it's like pandering when she has like real life experience, or she went out there and really understood what people are going through, whereas he just kind of borrowed from whatever was readily available or for what he perceived as being available.
All right.
So
Yeah.
I would say yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So nothing I want to add to is the fact that is the fact that that Centaur does see this as pandering, whereas Monk is seeing it as trauma porn. So even though on our end we can sort of understand, see the distinctions between the two, at the end of the day, Monk kind of he still hasn't, at least on his part, he still hasn't gotten over that. He's still kind of stuck in his ways, right? Because he's still seeing things from a cynical point of view, and even though Centaur tells him, "Hey, these are the conclusions that I'm coming from," he he can't help but feel like there's a part of him that kind of feels like, what, I still can't believe you even wrote this stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think some of it too is it happened so close to the end. I don't think we get enough time to really digest
But
his whole
it's also inconsequential at the
mindset.
end too.
Yes, exactly. Yes, because eventually they kind of have this. They end up having like the five-person panel. They get together. They nominate Sarah Lee's book as being the winner, and they kind of have this, really kind of, I guess, interesting ending. Definitely something I was I was very much unprepared for. So I like how it had this kind of fun twist where, they're doing this presentation and you see Monk, he goes up to the stage, presumably to accept the award, and he starts to talk, and then it fades to black. And it's something where I'm just totally unexpecting this thing to happen, and you find out that it fades to black, and what's happening is Monk is trying to kind of create a screenplay about his story of creating the Staggerly character and everything that happened. and he's doing it with the director that was interested in kind of doing and adapting his book. So I did think it was really interesting how they do that. And we find out from Monk that, we're trying to understand what actually happened at the end. We found out that Monk, he just kind of went up there and didn't say anything and left. And that was it. The director's like, wow, that's really not good. Like that was very boring. That's not how you want something to end. Like, that might work in books, but it doesn't work well on film. So I like how Monk kind of does this thing where he's, trying to rewrite the ending to, what could have happened. So kind of does like a what if thing. So you see Monk in kind of the first scenario that he writes in his head. He goes to Coraline, explains what happens, and it kind of does this fade out at the end. And the director's like, you know what? That sounds a little too rom-commy. I don't know if that's what we really want to do. So then he comes up with this final one that the director absolutely loved, and it was Monk is up there getting the award. A bunch of police officers break in there, and they're trying to arrest Stagger Lee because they think that he's a criminal. As he's holding the award, one of the officers is like, "Oh, he's got a gun," and then they all just open fire on Monk, and he ends up getting killed at the end in this kind of kind of humorous way to end things. But obviously, kind of goes with, once again, right? He's doing the same thing of creating the stereotype of, oh, it's got to be police and it's got to have the shootout and everything. So I guess to your point earlier, yeah, it sounds like hasn't really learned his lesson or hasn't really picked up from it, and he's still looking to kind of go for the common denominator. But yeah, I really enjoyed the ending. It was something I was totally not expecting to see. Kind of this, reality is that, well, he and Coraline didn't really get back together, or they're not on speaking terms, at least right now. And he kind of, creates these different ways of ending ending the movie. So I think a very great way to end it. Like I said, I wish they kind of played with that more. The idea of, like, as he's creating the story, we got to see it kind of interacting in front of us. So like I said, I wish something that they include a little bit more with, other than kind of that early on scene and then the end. But I think kind of a really fun way to end the story. So yeah.
So what would be your overall score for the movie then?
Yeah, so I would say that as far as the movie goes, I thought that this was a really, really fun movie. Like I said, I think the scenes with the family, I think, hit really hard, especially with Cliff. I think they did a lot for that. And then just kind of seeing Jeffrey Wright go out there and just put on such a fantastic performance, for beginning to end, kind of having these two different people that he's trying to play. I think just did a really great job. So I would say I would give it 4.3. I don't know what I'm going to put there out of 5. And yeah, I just really enjoy the movie. I think it was a great one.
So I'm going to give it a 4.4. And I'll say this. I really, really like the fact that that this movie is pretty much speaking as a I guess you could say as like as a parable to the way that we think in this country about race, because and I'm going to refer back to Bamboozled again, because I just see so many parallels between this and that movie. You would think that in the 24 years that have transpired since Bamboozled, things would have changed, right? I mean, African Americans hold more prominent positions in politics. We had our first black president who served 2 terms in office, right? So you think our perception of race and how we view and approach each other is going to be quite different. Like I said before, even though the way those perceptions have changed, the core idea behind it kind of has remained the same. It hasn't gone away. um, as as opposed to the stereotypical black black person being lazy and eating watermelons and doing all these things. It doesn't come to mind like they did back in the 20th century. The fact that when we think of a black person, we think of someone wearing a tank top, big guns, wearing a do rag, and carrying a Glock, in their pants. That kind of comes to mind when we think of the black experience, which which is something we shouldn't really be conjuring up, because we've seen what what black people have done and can do, right? But for whatever reason, that just seems to be the default mode. And I'll say this too, because and I'm gonna go off on a rabbit trail here, but but I've been thinking about this since I saw the movie last night. I mean, if you think about the title American Fiction, right, it kind of works in two ways. So, yes, this isn't, so the title does refer to this work of fiction that Monk is writing. And, and we see it playing out because it takes just the lowest common denominator of what it means to be black in America and just, puts it, puts it between two book covers and, and sells like hotcakes. But but it also works on a, on another level, on a social level, because there is this fiction that everything is right in this country. We've gone past the Jim Crow laws of the 1960s. Everybody's equal. Yes, we elected a black president, and everything's hunky dory, right? So there shouldn't be any issue. But but the fiction here is is that we tend to think that everything's all right when really there's still a lot more to be done in this country, because far from being totally tolerant and acceptance, there still are a lot of things that need to be ironed out. Because while we may say that we've progressed as a country, what this movie shows is we really haven't. We're pretty much stuck in our ways. So I think the title in itself kind of works on those two levels. I will say this: Sterling K. Brown stole the show in that movie. I thought he did a phenomenal job as Cliff.
Yes.
And it's like it's like every time Cliff came on, I'm like, oh man, I wonder what he's gonna do next. Like I wouldn't say he's the star of the movie, but he definitely made the role his own, and he did a great job. I mean, and Jeffrey Wright, I mean, that goes without saying. He did, that man's a brilliant actor. I mean, there's no two ways around it. I kind of wish they did more with the family story arc, because I really would have loved to see what else could have happened with with the mother, because it kind of petered out at the end. It's like, oh well, we just left her in this home and this is what she's doing now.
Yeah. There was kind of like a moment there where she was like dancing with one of the people that Cliff brought over, and I'm like, maybe they'll do something with it, but it just kind
of exactly, because she,
like you said, it definitely petered off. Yeah,
because she made that homophobic remark, and
yes,
when she's dancing with Cliff, and he's like, fuck this, I'm out of here. So I'm kind, and then she's dancing with one of Cliff's lovers. I'm like, you know what? I kind of would have liked to see if nothing else, I would have liked to see the mother say something where it's like, oh well, he's such a nice boy, or something to that effect, where Cliff is like, huh, maybe she is coming around, even if it is the Alzheimer's talking. So that's my main gripe, but obviously I'm not going to fault them too much on that, because because I felt like that probably would have bogged the story down if they focused too much on it. And I like the fact that I like the fact that that Monk's fictional life and his real life kind of get equal shares in terms of screen time. So
very much so.
So yeah, that's my score on American Fiction. Brilliant movie, by the way. I mean, it's just like with The Holdovers. It kind of flew under my radar, but as soon as you see it, you're like, man, I can't believe I slept on this. This is a really, really good movie.
Yeah, totally agreed.
All right, well, that's going to do it for our review of American Fiction. But go ahead and let us know down in the comments below what you think, if you agree with us or if you think we're talking shit. I mean, obviously this is this is a movie that's got so many layers to it. So I mean, there's just so many ways that you can interpret it. But please feel free to let us know what you think and share this video and others like it with everybody that you know. We're looking to grow our audience, and any help will be accepted. But other than that, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode, and we'll catch you on the next review. Bye.